Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this very interestingly shaped and very interestingly named little knife, and that is the CRKT Tighe Tac Two Tanto. That's right, it is a Tanto blade by Brian Tighe called the Tac Two. So the Tighe Tac Two Tanto. I'm going to try and say that as often as I can because, oh man, do I love that name. And I want to thank my buddies Frankie and Bud over at the Birdshot IV channel for sending this little guy along. Very interesting little knife. Wouldn't have gotten a chance to handle one otherwise, and I appreciate it very much. Let's do a size comparison here. This is your Spyderco Delica right here, so you can see the blade is a little bit longer than on the Delica. Spyderco PM2, while we're at it. And so, blade lengthwise, you're right in the same vicinity as the PM2 here. Ontario Rat number 2 and the Ontario Rat number 1. And so, blade lengthwise, closer to the Rat 1 than the 2, but nonetheless, gives you an idea here. And one thing I want to talk about real quick, though, is the locking mechanism, because it's a little unusual. It's a button lock. And so what that basically means is that you've got this little button right here, and hopefully you can see the inside of that. But when I press this button in, this little guy moves that way. It's just on a spring, and you'll get a better sense of this if you watch this assembly video. But basically, when you press this in, it removes this little swelling, if you will, prominence from the top of the blade tang, allowing the blade to completely shut. And so when you press in the button lock, the blade shuts, and then the detent is kind of neat on because it's a flipper button lock. But anyways, so that's what the locking mechanism is here. There's no liner, there's no frame lock, there's no anything else, it's just a button lock. So there you go. Let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of the Tighe Tac Two Tanto. Okay, so on the good side, first off, Tighe Tac Two Tanto is totally tubular to pronounce. Absolutely, absolutely fun to say, and I appreciate that 100%. If I have to say ZT0562CF one more time, I'm gonna cry. Tighe Tac Two Tanto, much more fun. Moving along, this is a Brian Tighe design, and it truly is a Brian Tighe design at really every level. Brian Tighe's a custom knife maker, I believe out of Canada, and he tends to specialize in very CNC heavy, very machined, very steppy, so it's a geometric patterns. And so taking one look at this knife, I would say in a heartbeat, yeah, it's a Brian Tighe design, even if I didn't know. Because, compound grind, he's got the damned iron crosses on it. I mean, it's a Tighe design. And so it's staying fairly faithful to the maker's aesthetic, even though it's an inexpensive knife. Speaking of which, it's an inexpensive knife. You're looking at $40 here, which is not a whole lot of money. And so I appreciate very much that they pay, that there's enough here that they're able to give it some basic quality, but it's not so expensive that you don't want to go there. So the price is fine. It's reasonable. Next thing I like about this guy is that it's got this deep carry clip on it, which is very, very nice. I'm a big fan of that because, well, they've done a couple of things right here. In addition to the deep carry clip actually being deep carry, you can see here that the screws inside the deep carry are actually flush mounted into the scale, which means that this can actually go all the way to the bottom of your pocket. Very, very often you'll see deep carry clips like this guy here, where you get screws that are in the middle of the clip area. This guy doesn't have that issue. So this will actually hang deep in your pocket, even if it is a little bit thin, the clip size that is. So that's kind of a nice thing. I like the clip very much. The grind on this guy is also interesting. It's sort of a compoundy sort of grind, meaning that it's a much thicker grind back here than it is over here. It's kind of a neat effect, and it's not something you see very often on your less expensive sorts of knives, so I like that very much. Next thing is the button lock on this guy is actually nicely implemented, in that, it works, no problem, and it's not dangerous in any way. There's not vertical blade play particularly on it. It's a nicely done little button lock here, and button locks are still pretty unusual in the folding knife world. For whatever reason, not a lot of people have gone there, and, there's a lot of good to them. They are also relatively ambidextrous. This guy is a flipper knife, and it doesn't particularly matter which finger you hit this with, so you can just as easily, and I'm not left-handed by any stretch of the imagination, but you can just as easily operate this guy using your left hand than just using your index finger. So even though the clip is not ambidextrously mountable, which is a shame, as the Birdshot IV channel would say, sorry lefties, this is nonetheless got a little bit of ambidextrousness to it, and that's nice. And then, I gotta say, button lock flippers are even more unusual. You don't see button locks very often, but that's kind of cool. it surprises me, and it took them some effort, I'm sure, to get that right, and now that they have, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. But the thing is, even if you don't love the flipper tab, you've got two other options, and that's the final bit of good here. In addition to flipping the knife open, you can also use the thumb stud on here, although the tent is slightly not dialed in for that. And you can also just hold down the button lock and let centripetal force pop the knife open. Not as good at this because I haven't practiced it as much, but you can do that the same way that you can with a good compression lock or a Benchmade axis lock or something along those lines. So you've got a couple of different ways that you can open this knife depending on your particular desires. So anyways, that's what's good about this. You got a few ways to open it. It's a button lock flipper, which is unusual. It's a button lock, which is unusual. It's got this compound dish grind, which is kind of neat looking, even if it's got some troubles. It's got a nice deep carry clip with flush screws in there. The price is fine. It's very much a Thai knife, and Tighe Tac Two Tanto is spectacular. So let's go on ahead and talk about the grate. So on the grate side, the action on this guy is actually really surprisingly nice. You know, I expected much, much worse out of a button lock flipper than I got here. This deploys very nicely. It deploys 100% reliably. I've never misflipped this guy. I've never screwed up the flip. And it falls shut very nicely when you depress the button lock. I mean, seriously, this is reasonably smooth. I'm not going to say it's like mechanically smooth to the level of the Norseman or something like that. I mean, you feel some sorts of resistance there, but it is a pretty smooth knife, and this flipping action is very, very good. I have no complaint with that. And this is a knife that gives you a sense of it that I found myself just idly flipping as I'm thinking about a problem at my desk at home. Because it's got that sort of a satisfying action to it. And so I got to give him credit for that. This has a really great action for being a button lock flipper and frankly just as a flipper in general. This is well done. So that's what's great here. Let's talk about what's bad. Couple of bad things here. The steel on this guy is okay. It's 8CR13 MOV, which is fine at this price. It's either barely adequate, barely inadequate. Takes a nice edge, doesn't hold it that long. It's okay. Next thing, the thumb stud on this guy I don't really feel is necessary. Ergonomically speaking, it's not stellar. You can use it, but you kind of really need to shoot out to the side there. And with my shorter thumbs, it doesn't work out that well. But more importantly, it's kind of in the slicing path. Meaning, as you're cutting with this knife, it's very easy to hang up on this thumb stud, and that's just not great. Next thing I gotta say is I'm not a huge fan of the flipper tab shape on this guy. This tends to work best as a push-button sort of flipper, where you press straight down. But they've made it a relatively sharp flipper tab. I would have almost preferred this to be something a little bit more flat and wide, so that I push down with a greater portion of my finger, and I'm not pressing the tip of my finger into this relatively sharp portion here. Not a big deal, but it's something I don't particularly love. Next thing is that the ergos are just not very good on this knife, particularly because the G10 here is fairly sharp on the inside. It's not terrible, but there's no chamfering done on the inside of the liners here, and as such, as you're gripping this guy, you feel your fingers kind of digging in against this G10, and it's not very good in the hand whatsoever. The clip also provides a little bit of a hot spot, but mostly you're just dealing with the fact that this G10 is completely uncontoured. And that's just ugly on your fingers. Had they done a nice chamfer on the inside here, I think it would be in a very different position. You can do that after the fact, as long as you're wearing a respirator, because sanding G10 is a bad idea. But nonetheless, the ergos on this just really aren't great. And then the final thing I gotta say is the compound grind here is okay, in that you get a decent slicer out here, but down at this end, look how freaking thick that is behind the edge. It's absolutely absurd. And so I really don't love the thickness of this guy in this portion in the back here. The compound grind is not a bad idea. It gives you fragile at one area and it gives you beefy on the other side, but this is just too beefy. I just don't like how thick this is behind the edge back there. So that's what's bad here. The steel is okay, although for the price, I can't get too bad out of shape. The thumb stud really shouldn't be on this. The flipper tab, I think, needs to be shaped a little differently. The ergonomics aren't very good because the inside of the G10 isn't chamfered here. And it's really, really thick behind the edge, despite having relatively thin blade stock. Let's talk about the ugly. Okay, so on the ugly side, first and foremost, if we look at the pivot here, on both sides, we have a symbol here that is called the Iron Cross. This is a Nazi symbol flat out. It was used and popularized by the Nazi regime. That said, in the last however many years since World War II, it has been adopted by outlaw bikers. It's been somewhat diluted, so not everybody who uses this symbol thinks about it as a Nazi symbol, and in fact, it's just become a sort of hallmark of Brian Tighe's work. But at least to me, it's still very, very ugly that they're using a Nazi symbol on this knife. No matter the rest of the dilution, I don't love that at all. Maybe other people are much more tolerant of that, but that's just, I saw that. It's like, really? Really, guys? Really? But okay, that may be a matter of personal taste. Some people are much happier with flea market Nazi memorabilia than I am, but that's ugly. Moving along. This knife actually, on a more functional and practical note, this knife unfortunately feels very plasticky to me. The scales here are a fiberglass reinforced sort of nylon along the lines of what you see in your Spyderco Delica here. But the way that it's implemented here, where it's got partial steel liners, so there's only a stripe of steel on the inside, leaves the knife feeling not all that well put together. There's a fair amount of flex in the scales themselves, so you can kind of pinch. And it just has this overall feeling, especially with the matte black plastic, that this is just kind of a plasticky knife, and that's just not great. At the price, okay, I can put up with it, but that doesn't bring me joy. And then the final issue with this guy is that the construction is just not very good on it. If you watch the disassembly video, this knife gave me a good deal of pain because things weren't put together properly. In order to get the centering to here, which looks really bad if you look at the scales, but is actually fine if you look at the tip, it took a long time. I needed to switch the pivot, switch washers around. I mean, it's clear that this knife was put together in such a way that it would look centered, but it wasn't well put together to start with. The build quality wasn't very good. Coming out of CRKT, that's not unusual. Unfortunately, they tend to race to the bottom, and this is a result of that. But there are other issues as well, alongside the centering and just overall jankiness of it. You can see that the blade grind is uneven. On this side, this plunge grind starts further back than over here on this side. And so that actually makes the centering look even worse, because it looks like it's way closer on this side than on the other side, but that's because the blade, I don't know, the construction here is not very good. It's a CRKT, so that's pretty much par for the course, but it's still ugly each time. So that's the ugly here. It's using a freaking iron cross for some reason. It's plasticky, and the construction on it is pretty janky. Let's go on ahead and go into the final conclusions here. So, okay, final conclusion. This is a really fun, kind of toy-like knife to play with, in that the action it's got a great little action here. So if you want to repeatedly flip a knife, this is a pretty good choice for it. Absolutely 100%. And the button lock itself is kind of a kick, because you can do fun things like that and whatnot. And the design is kind of neat, with the zigzags and whatnot, the compound grind, that sort of thing. There's a lot of good here going on at that sort of, that's neat level. But I just don't think it's that great of a tool. The construction on it doesn't feel very trustworthy. Frankly, it feels like it was put together with duct tape and freaking spit. That's no good, particularly. The blade on it is a lot more funky than it is functional. I don't like the cutting edge there. It's not terribly good in the hand, and honestly, for the price, for $40, you can get one of these guys, a Rat 1 and D2 steel, which is an incredible functional tool. It's way better in pretty much every way. The steel is better, the construction is better, it's better in the hand. This is just a massively better functional tool than this knife will ever be. So to sum it up, in a tragic twist, the Tighe Tac Two Tanto truly tends towards toy, throwing in the towel on tool. Not terrible, but I have trepidation. So I truthfully can't tout this transaction. Too bad. Sorry, couldn't resist. Hope this has been helpful for you and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.